The conflict in Gaza may be taking place on the other side of the world, but there are efforts here in Austin to try and support Palestinians. I sat down with Gumbo from the Democratic Socialists of America on behalf of the Austin for Palestine Coalition to learn about what's happening here in Austin to support Palestinians worldwide. Check it out. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Blue-Headed Stepchild. I'm your host, Sam Lee. Today, I'm here with Gumbo, who's with the Austin Coalition for Palestine.
Yeah, I'm Gumbo. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a rank and file member of the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, Local 1624 here in Austin, and one of the co-chairs of Austin Democratic Socialists of America, one of the core organizations for the Austin for Palestine Coalition.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Absolutely. All right, so what organizations form the Austin for Palestine Coalition, and what are the core objectives of the coalition?
Yeah, currently we have, I believe, 6 core organizations. So it's Austin DSA, PSL, the Party for Socialism and Liberation in Austin, Palestinian Youth Movement, Central Texas, the UT Austin Palestine Solidarity Committee, which is a local chapter of Students for Justice in Palestine, and a local organization called Austin with Palestine.
Okay. And what are the major objectives of the coalition?
Yeah, our primary objective, and we have a few more listed on our website, but our primary objective since we formed and ongoing is to struggle for an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza and the full end to the occupation of all occupied Palestinian territories.
Okay. So let's talk about that first one a little bit more, to advocate for a ceasefire. Yeah.
Right.
And I know that you've been pushing the Austin City Council to adopt a ceasefire resolution, which has happened in other places, right? Other cities. How receptive have city council members been to these efforts?
It's a mixed bag. You know, when we had the original ceasefire resolution on the table, it came from the City of Austin Human Rights Committee or Human Rights Commission as a recommendation to City Council. The Human Rights Commission cannot automatically put things on the agenda the way the Planning Commission and Urban Transportation Commissions can. So it was up to City Council to then take it onto the agenda. That requires 4 council members to co-sponsor it, and we had 3. At the time, those were Councilmember Jose Velazquez in District 3, Councilmember Vanessa Fuentes in District 2, and Councilmember Zocadri in District 9. We could not secure a 4th co-sponsor, so our struggle was primarily around getting it on the agenda in the first place. We could not speak as openly because what we were doing was going to the general public comment, which is capped at 10 speakers per city council meeting, and filling as many slots as we could when they opened up to then agitate for that because the rest of city council was pretty opposed to it. The mayor, Kirk Watson, was very firmly against having it on the agenda, and I know Councilmember Mike Siegel in District 7 signaled his support for it during his campaign, but it has not come back up at City Council since the start of the new term earlier this year.
Okay. And if the council were to adopt the resolution, what does that symbolize? What does that accomplish?
Yeah, we understand that it's a symbolic resolution. No one in the Austin for Palestine Coalition believes that Austin City Council passing this resolution will automatically end the war, right? But we also see in other cities across the country, I believe Chicago, Oakland, Houston passed one at one point, San Antonio passed one at one point, so places in Texas as well. It signals a groundswell of support across the country for an end to U.S. support for the war and an end to the U.S. guiding the war, because it's important to understand that this is not solely Israel's war. This is a war first and foremost by the United States. At every step of the way, we have United States personnel on the ground in Israel using missile defense systems and operating systems, providing intelligence services alongside the British to guide where the Israelis actually strike. So our intent in supporting the resolution was to show the American government at the national level that there is support, that the people of the United States do not want this to continue.
Sure. And I've read, too, that there are ex-military U.S. contractors that are on the ground, too, that are leading like the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is basically kicked out the UN, right, from administrating humanitarian, right,
That's
aid.
correct. Yeah. So the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is a joint project between the U.S. and Israeli governments that was enacted around May of this year and has actually been the perpetrator of much of the ongoing genocide in recent months. Thousands of people have been killed in Palestine at these aid distribution sites. When they removed the UN, it's UNRWA, the UN Refugee and Works Administration for Palestinian refugees. The UNRWA had a way of distributing aid to people who need it in a dignified manner. It was done through long-standing, decades-old community networks. People were not forced to go to some site and wait in line. Also, with the GHF situation, all of the sites that they distribute aid from are actually inside of the free fire zone for the Israeli military. So to assemble to
purposely put there, right?
Exactly. Yes. So to even get there, and you can watch the latest Electronic Intifada live stream from yesterday. To get to these aid distribution sites, you first have to gather at the edge of the alleged quiet zone, right, in the slowly forming ghettos in the Mawasi beach area, in the Deir al-Balah middle camps, and in Gaza City, and then walk several kilometers. I believe it's somewhere in the order of 5 to 10 miles in U.S. units to get to these sites, passing through several checkpoints, and then line up inside of gated areas where these mercenaries, former U.S. military personnel, private security firms are openly bragging on social media about, just shooting whenever they feel like. And along the way, the Israeli military will just spray machine guns into the crowds, will launch mortar shells and artillery rounds to guide and crowd control where people are going. We saw, I believe back in June, there was a giant, almost stampede, I think you could call it, of, the fences were broken right after the Humanitarian Foundation set up and all of their personnel fled. And it's not only is it monstrous and inhumane, it's undignified. It treats people in Gaza as if they're animals, as if they're, just cattle for slaughter. And also the idea of needing aid is a bit ironic because Gaza has been under siege for almost 20 years, and they've been very self-sufficient under that siege. There's a lot of agricultural land, especially in the north of Gaza around Beit Lahia and Beit Hanun. And reports from the UN at the end of July show that a total of about 86% or more of all agricultural land in all of the Gaza Strip has been destroyed or rendered inaccessible. So it's a question of why they need aid in the first place, and they need aid in the first place because they've been under siege.
Right, and there's been a blockade for a lot of that time too, right? Stopping things to get in, so it's almost a forced self-reliance and producing for yourself, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, well, bringing it back local, what do you say to local Jewish organizations like Shalom Austin, who argue that resolutions like the one that your coalition is pushing for at City Council don't really accomplish anything, and on the other hand, they serve to divide the community?
Yeah, I appreciate this question, and you sent it to me a little beforehand. The resolution was for a ceasefire. It was for an end to hostilities on both sides. And if you are against the idea of a ceasefire, if you think a ceasefire is divisive, I would really question the motivation there. The coalition got access to a newsletter email from, I believe, Shalom Austin or another community in Austin, giving guidance on how to speak against the ceasefire resolution. And a lot of it pointed out that they understood at the time that speaking against a ceasefire seems counterintuitive, that it seems, perhaps on the wrong side of history. I don't know if they used those words. And so counseled people to speak about how it's not a local issue, about how it's divisive for the community and so on. But it is a local issue. I mean, a war abroad will always come home. And we see this, I think, now with Trump sending in the National Guard to police D.C. It's something called the imperial boomerang effect, where everything that we do overseas comes home. And on top of that, there were local hate crime incidents. There was the attempted drowning of a couple children in Eula Springs by someone shouting about them being Palestinian. There was the stabbing of Zachariah Dawar in Austin after one of our protests. So it's not just an international issue. It is a local issue too. And the resolution included points about, hate crime reporting and safety and working against anti-Semitism, anti-Arab hate, and Islamophobia as well. So,
sure. Yeah, and in the same way that there's been a rise of Islamophobia, there's also been a rise of anti-Semitism since this conflict escalated, right? How do we separate criticism of Israel and the Netanyahu government and the Israeli military, IDF, from anti-Semitism, right? How do we be clear in trying to separate the two?
Yeah, this is another good question. I myself am Jewish. I am a Jew by choice. So I converted to Judaism in 2022. I had a very, very close friend in college who was rediscovering their family Judaism after their grandpa hid it when he fled from the Shoah, the Holocaust in Germany. And I was looking for a faith to fill kind of the faith-shaped hole in my own heart. And so I converted to Judaism. I began the process through Congregation Beth Israel here in Austin soon after I moved, and went to the mikveh to kind of complete the ritual on my birthday in 2022. And as a Jew by choice, a Jew by choice and someone who was already politically on the left and already aware of a lot of things going on in Palestine, really took it upon myself to think critically about my relationship to Israel, to Zionism, to Judaism. And I think one of the greatest crimes that the Zionist movement has ever done is conflate Judaism and Zionism. So we have to separate the two. Judaism, the faith, is practiced historically by the Jewish people, although it is a faith and an ethnicity to some extent. Zionism, the political movement that grew out of the late 1800s, was an answer to the Jewish question in Europe, and specifically was saying the answer to European anti-Semitism is to just take all the Jews and put them somewhere else. And there were several candidates for that. They looked at like Peru, Argentina. They settled on the land of Palestine and created a state. And I don't believe that Judaism or Jewishness can be taken up by a state, a nation state with defined borders and a military. And so criticism of that state is not anti-Semitic. Point blank, period. You can criticize any state. We can criticize the United States. Think about European countries that are pretty nationally homogenous, like Germany, Norway, Denmark. You wouldn't say that you're anti-Norwegian to criticize Norway or something. So why is it then anti-Semitic to criticize Israel as a state? And for that reason, we have to decouple them and criticize the actions of the settler colony of Israel and return sovereignty over that land to the Palestinian people and not get lost in that argument. And I will also add the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL, has a pretty bad track record of recording any anti-Zionist or pro-Palestinian action or protest or anything as anti-Semitic, which not only muddies the waters on what is and is not anti-Semitism, but makes Jews generally unsafe in the diaspora because, well, if everything being done is anti-Semitic, what actually is anti-Semitism at that point?
It discounts actual anti-Semitism.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the state of Israel kind of traffics in anti-Semitism a little bit. Its propaganda abroad relies on Jews in the diaspora feeling unsafe, feeling like anti-Semitism is just this fact of history, this fact of life that could come back at any moment. It's a historical process. So anti-Semitism has come and gone throughout several hundreds of thousands, not hundreds of thousands, but hundreds, and going back thousands of years to the Jews entering diaspora after the destruction of the Second Temple. And it's not simply a historical fact that anti-Semitism exists. It's something done by people, and it can be undone by people as well. And so we need to be clear about what anti-Semitism actually is and what it is not, so that we can talk about the ongoing horrors that were visited upon the Jewish people by Nazi Germany, that now Jewish people in Israel are visiting upon the Palestinians.
Yeah, for sure. And then in that same vein, as the conflict in Gaza and the West Bank has progressed, have you seen a shift here in Austin in Jewish support for your cause?
Absolutely. One of our core members of the coalition is Jewish Voice for Peace. I think I forgot to mention them at the top. Jewish Voice for Peace is an anti-Zionist organization of Jews across the country. They are core in some of the first anti-Zionist congregations, such as Tzedek in Chicago. And from the start, from the very beginning, there were Jews part of the coalition. And over time, more people have joined. I think more people have begun to unpack the Zionism that they were born and raised in and realize that they can't square the circle of a state that is purportedly for all Jews, that is visiting these unspeakable horrors and saying that it's in our name. And so many of us are saying that it's not in our name, that when we said never again, it meant for anyone. Never, never, ever again should we ever have mechanized slaughter on the scale of the Shoah or on the scale of the genocide and Nakba in Gaza. And so we have seen a growing support among Jews in Austin. We've seen support among people in Austin more generally. I think a poll recently showed somewhat like 70% of Travis County supports a ceasefire. A majority of Democrats across the country, or Democrat voters, support a ceasefire. A majority of Americans have a negative view of Israel as a state. So there has been growing support, and it continues to grow.
Okay, and so another way that your coalition advocates is by putting pressure on corporations and politicians who support the Israeli occupation of Palestine, either monetarily or politically. So when the conflict started, or amped up, I should say, there was a lot of pressure put on the University of Texas here in Austin. How has that progressed?
I cannot speak directly to that. I'm not a student. I haven't been a student at UT Austin, so I don't know the current status of things at UT. I know that when the student intifada last spring, which began at Columbia University and other universities, I believe in like the Pacific Northwest, came here, members of the coalition stood alongside the students, and we have continued to fight back against the whole outside agitator narrative of, you're not a student, why are you part of this? Because it's a whole community struggle. And students...
The UT Students is one of the organizations that forms the coalition, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And they've been severely repressed. Palestine Solidarity Committee was at various points disbanded as an official student organization, continues to organize in what capacity they can. I am not familiar with what exactly that looks like for them right now, and I don't want to speak for them. But I know as a community member and as a coalition member and a community leader, when they were attacked, we were all attacked. And so it was our human right and human duty to join them in that struggle, to join them on campus, to be there with them. Many of our comrades were arrested with them despite not being students because we saw their struggle as our struggle.
Okay. All right. Are there any other local businesses, organizations, or anything like that that have that you have directed kind of efforts to push back on their support?
Yeah, so we have Austin DSA, and alongside the coalition runs a campaign called Austin Against Apartheid. It's styled after the No Appetite for Apartheid campaigns that have been successful in places like Connecticut, Tampa Bay, and are popping up across the country. The goal there is to follow the Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions movement, or BDS, and get local stores to sign a pledge saying we will not carry these specific Israeli agricultural products or other products on the BDS list. If you go to bdsmovement.net, you can find that full list. Some of them are very big corporate targets like Microsoft or Dell or Amazon, and some of them are Sadaf. Sabra Hummus is one of those targets. And so getting these stores to agree to align to the BDS principles, to not sell any products that are on the BDS list, to continue chipping away at the economic power of the state of Israel. And we have about 30 or so stores like that in Austin that we've organized through the AAA campaign, and we continue to organize more stores, and we make it a reciprocal relationship. So some of our apartheid-free stores have faced repression because of their stances, and so we have taken it upon ourselves to help them, to provide training on de-escalation with customers who are especially aggressive, to help with giving them positive reviews or reporting negative reviews that are, clearly unbased. And hosting events, doing things with these stores to make it more of a community effort and not just, hey, do this for us. We're making it reciprocal and mutual.
Yeah. Yeah, because it can be a lot to put on somebody, right? And just take up this cause. And but if you can make it reciprocal, it feels a little bit more of a buy-in, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Now, let me ask you, you've mentioned kind of anti-Zionism, right? Is it possible that, and maybe this is just, me trying to educate myself, right?
Sure.
In earnest, right? Like, because I think a lot of people are overwhelmed about the historical nature of the conflict, right? And what is it, two sides, and is there justification that I don't understand from years back, and the complications of things. And you talked a little bit about the establishment of a state of Israel in 1948 after World War II, and this Zionist movement for the creation of the state. Is it possible that the state of Israel exists and it's not then aggressive and pushing settlements and checkpoints and oppressing at the same time? Can both of those exist in at the same time, or are both of them considered Zionist?
The short answer, and the shortest answer.
Sorry if that's not
it's a big question,
articulate, clear answer. It's just something that I think has been brought up a couple times that I'm not clear on.
Yeah, I think you are not alone in having those questions. I think that's a very common thing that we hear when organizing people who are, just less informed. Generally, everyone's got lives, right? Everyone's got something that they're working on, and it's very easy to not think about it because it's not openly a United States war. So it's not like when the U.S. invaded Iraq or Afghanistan and it was United States troops on the ground. Now, we do have troops on the ground in Israel. We have former troops on the ground in Gaza. We had, I believe, Marines or some other special forces who helped with the raid on the Nuseirat camp last year, attempting to rescue hostages, and led to the massacre of over 200 civilians in Gaza at the same time. The short answer to your question about whether the state of Israel could exist without, therefore, aggressing upon its neighbors is no. Israel as a state is established explicitly as a nation state for ethnic Jews. So it's enshrined in law. It's been further enshrined in law and judicial decisions in recent years that there are no voting rights or civil rights for Palestinians inside of the state of Israel, what they call 48 Palestine. And they continue to send settlements. Just earlier this week, Netanyahu was giving an interview talking about the project for Greater Israel, which actually includes land through the Sinai in Egypt up to parts of eastern Egypt proper, parts of Jordan, Lebanon, parts of southern Syria, extending into Iraq. The Zionist movement established the state of Israel as a settler colony. And it was not only done for Jewish people to answer the question of European anti-Semitism, but done hand in hand with European colonizers at the end of the 19th and early 20th centuries.
It was the British state of
so
Israel.
The British Mandatory Palestine was established after the First World War, when Britain and France carved up the old Ottoman Empire, and British Mandatory Palestine saw the first widespread revolts of Palestinian Arabs. You can look at the Palestinian Revolt of 1936 to 1939. So it's been a long-standing, over 100-year struggle for liberation from an outside colonizer. And there were attempts made at the time when Jewish settlers first arrived to coexist, to say, you're coming here, you're fleeing anti-Semitism in Europe, you can live alongside us, we can take you in.
And there was a Jewish minority there at the time, right?
Exactly. And there were Jews in that land prior, too. It's not a 1,000-year-old conflict between Jews and Muslims. It's not a 1,000-year-old conflict between, Arabs and Jews. It's people deliberately went there with the intention to settle and expel. And whether they went there or if they went to another place that the Zionist movement, as envisioned by its founders, Theodor Herzl and Ze'ev Jabotinsky, chose, the intention was to expel the local population and to create their own state. And they only have what exists as Israel now because that is where they were stopped during the foundation of Israel in 1948, and then what they were able to seize during the war in 1967.
Mm-hmm.
So
the 6-Day War.
Yes. And so there is no Israel as a state without the settlement and the colonization.
Okay.
And I won't go on to then prescribe what a solution, whether it's one state, two state, whatever.
To my next question.
Yeah,
what would a just and lasting peace look like to you?
Yeah, I think in the same vein as I think about indigenous sovereignty in the United States, the Palestinian people are the indigenous people of the land, whether they're Palestinian Muslims, Palestinian Christians, Palestinian Jews. It is the indigenous people's right to sovereignty over their historic land. They have lived there for generations, for thousands of years. It's the same population of people, by and large, that lived there during biblical times. And some were expelled and became Jews in diaspora. Many stayed. And so I will not say what a state looks like for them, because that's not my role. My role in this struggle is to amplify their demands for sovereignty, for unification, and for basic human rights. And until that time, until we get sovereignty over the land for Palestinian people, there can't be justice, no lasting justice.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you were going to ask, but I think there's also often a jump to quickly condemn the attacks on October 7th. And I think it's important to understand that October 7th was an inevitability. Whether it was Hamas or any other faction, whoever carried out anything, it was a response to decades of subjugation and oppression. And that is ultimately caused by the settlement on the land. Yeah. And there are also plenty of documents showing that various parts of the Israeli military knew it was going to happen, let it happen. They enacted the Hannibal Doctrine on that day and killed hundreds of their own people with firebombing from Apache helicopters. One of the last articles published in Mondoweiss before October 7th was actually an article about the skyrocketing suicide rates in Gaza. So you can only keep people under so much pressure for so long before something breaks. And for that, we have to hold the settler state accountable.
Right. Yeah, it's multifaceted, right? It's everything from forced expulsion from settlements and the checkpoints to blockades. And eventually, if you just push and push and push, people are going to push back, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that's what it was. And it's unfortunate, right? And it's an ugly way that it happened, but I think it was an inevitability. Right? Yeah. Okay.
And it is also their international human right. The right to armed struggle for decolonization is enshrined in the United Nations. So it is important to understand that it is their right to have weapons, to fight an armed struggle. It was the right of the Algerian people. It was the right of the Vietnamese people. It is the right of a colonized people, as enshrined in international law, whatever that means to us at this point, to engage in that tactic. And there are many other tactics. We have tried so many things. There was the Great March of Return in 2018 and 2019, where every day or every Friday of every week for almost 2 years, people in Gaza marched to the fence, separating them from sometimes villages that they could see from the fence that their families come from. And they protested, and it was peaceful and civil, and they were shot and killed. They targeted medics, they targeted journalists, they continued to target journalists up to this day. The Al Jazeera journalist Anas al-Sharif was martyred just on Sunday, along with his entire crew. It is a policy of the Israeli military to clamp down on anything, no matter what, no matter how violent or peaceful.
Okay. And then just kind of bringing this back local again. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, it's a habit to rubber band back and forth.
No, it's an issue, or it's a global issue, mm-hmm. With a conflict happening on the other side of the world, but that we're trying to get perspective with on here in Austin, mm-hmm. right? And so it's I think it's normal that we're going to kind of bounce back and forth. Yeah. Okay, so for viewers or listeners who want to be involved but aren't sure how, what's the most impactful thing they can do here from Austin?
Yeah, the most impactful thing would be to come to our coalition events. So you can go to Austin for the number 4 Palestine.org, and I'll make sure to get that for you for the show notes. Come to our events. We'll be having a town hall coming up soon, I believe. Join one of our partner organizations. So join DSA, join PSL, join JVP. I believe Palestine Solidarity Committee is mostly open to students. So if you're a student, you can join that. And Palestinian Youth Movement focuses on organizing Palestinian and Arab youth. So for any people out there listening who are of those nationalities, I would recommend looking into PYM. The answer, and this is the answer to so many things, right? The answer to Trump, to ICE, to labor struggles, to your landlord sucking is to get organized. And that organization can take many forms. It can take the form of an explicit political organization like one of ours. It can be a labor union. It can be a tenant union, any kind of organization that helps you work with your neighbors and your coworkers to fight back on what is happening to us. Because the same things that are being visited upon Palestinians have or will be visited upon us. And to take that a bit further, thinking about Trump and ICE, again, that imperial boomerang effect. ICE has been given the largest budget it's ever had in this most recent budget bill.
60 billion or something like that. And it's
I can't even conceive the number.
Right. And very loose parameters on what it can be used
exactly.
for. Right?
And it has been used on people speaking up for Palestine. So think of the case of Mahmoud Khalil, who was taken from in front of his house, in front of his wife, and his wife, Noor Abdullah, actually spoke at the rally for him in Jena, Louisiana a few months ago. We sent a contingent down to support him, but not just him. Several people have been targeted for their constitutionally protected First Amendment free speech by ICE because they are not natural-born citizens of the United States.
Well, in taking it even a step even further, I saw that Gavin Newsom in California had a press conference yesterday to speak about redistricting, and Border Patrol showed up in full...
I had not seen that.
Yeah, and Border Patrol showed up armed, in full uniforms, and of course with the face covered.
Yeah.
But a completely separate issue, right? Talking about redistricting, and now that's being weaponized against the state of California. Not ICE, but a separate division of that. In Border Patrol, but same vein, right?
Yeah, it's all under Department of Homeland Security.
Right.
We've had Border Patrol in Austin, so we do have ICE operating in Austin. They're not operating in the same way that you might see in places like Los Angeles or in across California. I really appreciated your piece with the person from Raices a few weeks ago. I listened to a couple of your episodes to prep.
She's excellent.
And I will add that the way ICE is working here and the way ICE will probably continue to work here and target people in our community fighting for Palestine is DPS, the Texas State Troopers, are pulling people over, and they are either being tailed directly by an undercover ICE vehicle or calling ICE to the scene within 5 to 10 minutes. And so we've seen that repeatedly, and we know DPS were the first on the scene during the student intifada at UT last year. They were there before the students were, with their horses and their flashbangs and all these horrifying military gear that they've gotten from the same people, the same companies that manufacture weapons for Israel. I believe, I don't know if it was Israel who kind of wrote the book on using CS gas or tear gas, but I know that they deploy the same exact munitions against people in the West Bank and in Gaza that they deploy on protesters here. And so that's why it is both a local and an international fight. I said I'm a socialist, I am an internationalist. I believe that oppression everywhere or anywhere is oppression to everyone.
Sure.
And the fight in Palestine is no different from the fight here. And, they train with the Israeli military. The Cop City movement in Atlanta, Georgia was explicitly about cross-training with the IOF and local police departments. We have not found data that Austin Police Department has trained with the IOF. I believe they sent a chief or somebody to visit Israel maybe in 2006 was the last thing I could find. But we know that this kind of transfer of techniques happens regularly.
Right.
And in much the same way, the Palestinians actually transfer their own techniques for resistance and for uprising to us. So when the Black Lives Matter uprisings in Ferguson, Missouri happened, it was Palestinians on Twitter and on social media educating protesters in Missouri about how to treat CS gas wounds, how to treat pepper spray wounds, how to, form a crowd to protect against police incursion. And again, during the George Floyd uprisings in 2020, there was a lot of transfer of knowledge from people oppressed in one place to people being oppressed in another place, so that collectively we can resist and overcome these things that are tearing us down.
And why do you think there is such a strong tie between the military, Israel, the United States? And, I know it goes back to the United States being the first country to recognize Israel as a state after World War II, and it's being its greatest ally.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, through the military-industrial complex, providing a lot of that support. But nowadays, right, it seems, you mentioned at the beginning, some of the public support or the public backlash against what's going on. And I've read that a big part is like the political action committees, in which if politicians are overtly against, then they will see that they're primaried strongly. Is that true? I know I'm kind of jumping around here a bit, but why does that support? Why is that still that connection?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think an easy answer that someone might give you is to blame all of it on AIPAC, or to say, oh, it's Israel is running the United States, or the Jews are running the United States. That is anti-Semitic. That is an anti-Semitic answer, and it's a cop-out answer.
Right.
I think
I don't think I was going there when I was talking
were not
about
saying
the,
that.
but there is a factor in which, if politicians are too overtly outspoken, then they will look at that and, divert campaign funds elsewhere, right?
Yeah. I mean, you can see cases like Jamal Bowman in New York. He had a weaker stance on Israel, and he strengthened his stance on Israel, and he was primaried by an AIPAC-backed candidate. He did lose that race.
And I know Bernie Sanders speaks about this a bit too, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, he's insulated from having his own backing, but he has the independence now to speak that way, right?
And so it is an easy cop-out anti-Semitic answer to just say, oh, it's all AIPAC. AIPAC plays a significant role. Let me be clear. But I think a better way to think about it, the way that I tend to think about it, is looking at it as an imperial project. So the United States is, let me put on my political science hat for a second and say that the United States is the global hegemon, which is to say that they are the highest power, the greatest power in the world in terms of military strength. We are 1 million people stronger or greater than the next largest military.
The U.S. spends more than the 2nd through 9th places combined, right?
And all of that money is money that shareholders for these companies that create weapons want to keep coming. And so there is an immense amount of capital pressure on the United States to continue exporting violence overseas. And Israel is its best outlet for that. So there's a really good article. It's quite dense, but it's called Palestine's Great Flood by the scholar Max Ajl. That's Maxajl. I think he's Dutch. That describes this U.S.-Israeli war machine as kind of a turbine for destruction and waste, and the process of wealth accumulation by capitalists and by company owners and military contractors and politicians as accumulation by waste, which is to say they are constantly accumulating wealth either through the direct destruction of places, and specifically the Arab region, the Levant, from Egypt all the way to Iran. Either they are selling weapons that are used to destroy, and they make money on those sales, or they're selling weapons to the Arab countries like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the UAE, who look at Israel and say, I need more weapons because they have so many weapons. and these companies are able to sell to both sides effectively, and keep this never-ending arms race of spending going, where they continue to amass wealth here in the imperial core and continue to contribute to destruction, waste through destruction, or waste through the amassing of weapons that are never used but have to be created to sit in a warehouse somewhere. And all of that just keeps going.
And will eventually
endlessly.
Become dated, right? Outdated
and
technology.
Then you gotta buy new stuff,
and then you got to have the most up-to-date for deterrence.
Yeah. And that's why so many of us on the left here in the U.S. look at Palestine as the compass for our struggle, because Israel, the settler colony, is the mechanism that the United States and all of our corporate overlords or whatever are using to keep that going, because they can give weapons and money to Israel. And then because Israel is stronger, its neighbors get worried, and then they start to also accumulate weapons, and it never ends.
Yeah.
And so I think it's better to think about it as that death drive of capitalism than it is to think about who's lobbying whom, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's multifaceted, right? I think it's both are true and more is true, right? It's many dimensions of it, and it's historical, it's racial, it's all those things, right? Yeah. Awesome. Well, Gumbo, you're infinitely knowledgeable and been a great guest, and I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, I brought a quick poem I was going to read to end us out. This is, many people may have been familiar already. It was written by the martyr Rafat al-Harir. He was in Gaza in Shujaiya and was martyred by a targeted airstrike on Wednesday, the 6th of December, 2023. This is, "If I must die, let it be a tale."
Okay, take it away.
So, if I must die, you must live, to tell my story, to sell my things, to buy a piece of cloth and some strings, make it white with a long tail, so that a child, somewhere in Gaza, while looking heaven in the eye, awaiting his dad, who left in a blaze, and bid no one farewell, not even to his flesh, not even to himself, sees the kite, my kite you made, flying up above, and thinks for a moment an angel is there, bringing back love. If I must die, let it bring hope, let it be a tale. It was written on November 27th, 2011, during one of the earlier bombardments of Gaza. I return to it a lot because, I'm very cognizant of the fact that I am a white person in the United States with quite a comfortable life and a union job. And I look at my phone every day, and I open Telegram or Instagram or whatever, and I see videos of mangled children, and I can't fathom how you see that every day for almost 2 years. Today is day 679 of the escalated Nakba, and you don't think it has to stop. And we're so limited in what we're able to achieve right now in the U.S. because we are not organized enough for it, because, working people who care don't control the supply chain and distribution systems and logistics that could stop the flow of weapons. Because the moment the U.S. turns that tap off, this ends. And so I'm very proud that we work with PYM, who recently had a huge win with their Mask Off Maersk campaign, ending shipments from the shipping company Maersk to Israel through the port of Haifa and the port of Tel Aviv Jaffa. And I'm proud to be in DSA, where we just, at our national convention this past weekend, passed a priority resolution to work towards an arms embargo, labor for an arms embargo, organizing workers in those areas, organizing politicians who have sway over those supply chains. If you are listening to this and you do work in the distribution and supply chain for weapons manufacturing, whether that's parts for F-35s or bullets for guns, please reach out to us, because anything we can do to stop this will still not be enough. So thank you so much for having me.
No, of course.
You can go to Palestine.org to find more about the coalition. You can go to austindsa.org to find more about my organization. And free Palestine. from the river to the sea.
And we'll include all that information in the show notes. And, you said you don't understand how people could see these images and hear this information and be at peace with it or be okay with it. But I think a lot of people purposely kind of blank it out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And want to be uninformed. And so hopefully through your efforts and your organization's efforts can continue informing the public and change hearts and minds. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Gumbo. Thanks, guys.